Alright, so we finished up our little study here on putting a 1000 side cover on a 920, and it went really well. It wasn't that hard to do at all. You just got to get the parts off of a 1000, and we also swapped out the 1000's Bendix gear and barrel right here for an 1100's Bendix gear and barrel, and it did even better. So like the best case scenario is a 1000 side cover because it's really easy to do, and then using the Bendix gear and barrel, just these two, off of a 1100, and it works really well because it doesn't bob at all, hardly any. So what we're going to do is actually see what it would take to put a 1100 side cover on this motor right here, but we're going to have to modify some things because it's going to need some shims. So let's scoot over here to the mill, and we're going to look and see the differences in these two covers. Then we'll see what we got to do. But thanks to my little sheet right here, we got it all laid out, and so we know, and this is the 1100 right here, a lot of these parts interchange, but the side cover itself is different. So we could swap out, this is my 920 right here, the parts I would use, and then if I swapped over to the 1000 and then into the other. So we see what we got to do. Now we just got to figure out how to make things line up right. So let's head over there and see the differences in these side covers. Alright, so over to the mill with our side covers here. Now I'm not going to be doing any milling, so to speak. What I'm going to do is use the Z-axis of the mill because I got some indicators on it. I'll be able to probe the differences in the heights of the parts on the two side covers. Just what are we worried about in differences between these two covers? Now this is the 1100 cover. It's the bubble cover right here, and so it's a little bit taller if you look at the surface there, even sitting on the mill, than this cover here. This is a 750 or 920 first gen. But it's not too much of an issue that this height is off because this is the side of the motor, so to speak. What we got a problem with is the position of the stator and the pickups in reference to our flywheel, because the flywheels are different between the 1100 and like the first gens, the 920 or the 750. Even some of the 700s and things. So let me take these off, but this is the stator right here, and this is the broke one, by the way, and then we got our pickups right there. So if we pull those off, what we got to do is figure out the height difference between the side of the motor, or our datum right here, and where the pickups sit up on these three, and then where the stator sits down on the bottom. So what we're looking for is the difference between here and this surface, and here and this surface right here. Now the rest of this stuff bolts right up on there. That's pretty cool. And they even left provisions, although a lot of the 1100s only have one pickup that would be used over here, they have 3 posts. So that's kind of cool. We can still match up our first gen pickup over here on these 3 because they left that one right there. Alright, so if we look at the differences in our cover from this surface to the stator mount and this surface to the pickup mount for these two, we can see that there's a little bit of a difference. So this one's taller. This is the second gen, the 1100. It's 49 and 33.75 for these two measurements. For the 75920, it's 40.85 and 21.58. So what that means is we just need to add a shim. So for this one, we're going to add about an 8mm shim, so 8.15 millimeter thick shim for the stator, which is about 0.32 inches. And then this one from here to here was different by 12.17 millimeters, and it's almost a half inch, so it's like 0.479. And also, just to be sure, I measured the distance from here to this boss right here. Now this is the Bendix pin, and so if everything lines up, they should be pretty close. So the Bendix bearing right here from the surface was about 8.8 millimeter. For this one over here, it's about 7.7, so it's pretty close. What it's going to do is make the Bendix engage a little bit more into the flywheel. So our only risk is that we're going to hit the metal side of the flywheel, the soft metal, and it might put some marks in it. But I don't think being about a millimeter off is going to hurt it because it wasn't engaging good anyway. And if you saw in the other video, I actually machined this surface off about a millimeter in order to get a little bit better engagement. So no worries there. I don't think we'll have any problems at all. So now, all we got to do is make some little shims. Well, where are we going to make some shims? They're going to have to look a lot like this surface right here because all of the wiring is on the back of the stator. So we got to kind of imitate this. And these little guys we could just make some pins for. But the cool thing is I got them right here in my old cover. So what I'm going to do is take this out of this cover, cut these little guys off, and we're going to make some shims out of the old cover, and then we'll be able to plop them over here onto the 1100s cover, and it should stack upright. So we'll get set up and do that real quick, and then we'll be ready to put this thing back together with an 1100 side cover and see if it all stacks up. Oh, and just one more thing, you know, this is interesting and all, making some shims, trying to mix and match, but you know, Yamaha did this stuff just like this right here for those mid-years, 84, 85, 86, 87, some of those. And we can see that because when I was doing my study for a couple of the models, you can see right here there was a stator spacer. If you looked it up in the bill of materials or you looked up in the drawings, you can see for the 86 and 87 700 they put a stator spacer in there. And they did the same thing for the 96 and a couple of the early ones, they got a little stator spacer on the 750. So it's interesting to see that they actually thought about this too, because they were flip-flopping flywheels around. So some of these models, like this 700 right here, it actually has a narrow flywheel, and so they would have had to space that stator off. Now I don't know if it's going to be the same thickness spacer we're going to end up. We have no idea, because I don't even know if you could find these little guys right here. I got the part numbers, but it's interesting to see that they did the same thing, mixing and matching parts, trying to see what would be the best scenario for these motorcycles. Alright, so after a little ugly machining and Sawzall, we got this little part out, and I even managed to get that freaking little screw out of there. So we got that guy, and we got this guy, one of our bosses, and we got that guy, and we got that guy. So what we're going to do is clean these up and get these back looking like normal little pieces. Then I'll take them over to the lathe over there, and we will set these things up and make our shims. So we'll be back once we get all these cleaned up and ready to be some temporary shims. Now, if this works out, I may set these things up on a CNC and actually make them out of some billet aluminum. Then if folks needed to, they could buy the little shim kit, and you could put a bubble cover on your first Gen Virago. So we'll get set up here on the lathe in just a minute and get these things cleaned up. Alright, so with our cool little shims made from our old broken cover, we got that one, and we got the little spacers for the pickups. We're good to go with there, so I don't need this guy anymore. Not much left anyway. But before I go throwing this on my good 1100s cover to put it on the motor, I want to put it on this one over here because I notched out. That way I can see if there's any interference, because I really don't want to wreck my 920 motor goofing around putting this stuff on there. So first off, we're going to set all of this over here, and then I'm going to put this cover on. We'll be able to look down inside of there when we put it over on the motor, and we're going to get to see how everything stacks up. So let's get this guy put on there. Like I say, worked out really cool for my little shim. He just goes on there like and so, and then we take our stator and we set it back on there. He fits right on. Now the bolt's got to be a little bit longer to compensate for the extra little shim there. So we got to get all that lined up like that for the stator. Now we just need to swing around, and we got to put our little spacers on. They got little bumps that match up to the old bumps. So we put those guys on like that and like that. Now let me set this over here. And a little bit longer bolts for this one as well. And there we go. So let's move over to the motor, and we're gonna put this guy on there, and then we can look down in there and see and just make sure nothing's touching, nothing's hitting before I go cranking on this motor. Alright, so one more time we're gonna remove the 1000's cover. Now, because we got our little sheet here and it told us that things can mix and match, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna leave this because it's the same for the 1100 and the 1000 and a couple of the others. And also the starter is different for the 1100 to the 1000, but as long as you keep the starter motor and its gear and the intermediate gear, it doesn't make any difference. So I could swap out for the 1100 with the other intermediate gear for the 1100, or I can just leave this the same, because as long as the clutch on the starter motor matches up to the intermediate gear, it doesn't matter. So we'll keep the 1000 set up just like it is. Then all I got to do is just change the cover out. So let's get this cover off real quick and we'll swap it out. And there we go. Now we got our 1100 second gen cover mounted up to our 920 here, using some of the components from the 1000 as well. So now let's get the camera down in here and let's see how well everything matches up in there with all of our shims. Alright, so with our cut open cover we can see the pickups and we can see the flywheel and we can see everything. So let's zoom down in there and see if we did a good job on our little shims. So let me grab a wrench, and what I'm going to do is rotate it around. Now I put a little white dot right where the pickup is on the pickup housing right there. And so what we're looking for is to make sure it's dead center. So it's pretty good, actually looks pretty good in the line. When I rotate it, you'll see the plate come around. Then also we want to check and make sure we got the stator deep in there, but not so deep that it drags. So first thing I'm going to do is rotate it around and just make sure I don't hear anything dragging in there. So we'll be real quiet and listen. So I don't hear anything. I hear the compression of that cylinder. Alright, so there's my pickup plate right there on the flywheel. So it's dead center on that. Looks really, really good. So I'm not hearing any noise. So it looks like we did a really good job with our shims because everything lined up just right for this second gen cover over on this 920. So now we got everything confirmed. I have higher confidence that I'm not going to wreck my motor here by putting this thing on there with these shims, because you can see my little shim right there. There's one of them. One right there, and then the one that's down there in the stator. So now we can take this guy off, go ahead and swap our 920 stator and pickups from the 1000 cover we had on there, swap that over to the 1100 cover, and we'll be good to go to give this a try. Alright, so with oil back in it and everything buttoned back up, it is time to test and see if it stays engaged with a full 1100 side cover on it and the little shims that get everything lined up. So first, I'm just going to turn the ignition on. Oh, and by the way, I need to check and make sure I'm getting voltage this time because I changed the position of the stator. So I want to check that too. So right now our battery is reading 12.88, so we'll check that as soon as we fire it up and see if it's going to go good. Oh, and one other note, you'll notice right here, since this bubble cover is bigger, the shifter hits the cover. So the options would be either bend the shifter out a little bit, you'd have to heat it up and bend it a little bit, or you could take that pretty little cover off and just leave the ugly side cover on there and you'd be good to go. Well, alright, so with our ignition off, we're just going to crank it and make sure this guy stays out and it still sounds like it's going to start good and it's not hitting anything. So here we go. Oh yeah, so that still sounds good, sounds just like a second gen. So now let's turn some fuel on and we're going to see if this guy will fire up. Alright, we got some fuel on and I cranked it a few times so it may have flooded itself, who knows. But we got our ignition on and we're going to choke it a little bit and see if we can get this dog to fire up. So there you go. That's how you put a second gen 1100 side on a 920 right here. Everything worked great, just had to do those little shims, so I'll probably write some dimensions down. If anybody's thinking they might want to try this, I could probably see if I can make some of those little guys on the CNC, and then you could have them to put this cover on a first gen as long as you got that little pin boss we talked about in the front. Well, alrighty, we'll give it one more crank just for giggles and see if it runs. Well, alrighty, there you go. Hope that helped someone, and thanks for watching.